The summer air in Riverside, Oregon, carried the low, steady rumble of motorcycles rolling in from every corner of the state. The annual Thunder Valley Riders Gathering had become something more than a rally over the years. It was a reunion for veterans, small business owners, retirees, and families who brought lawn chairs and homemade pies. Chrome reflected the afternoon sun. Country music drifted across the fairgrounds, and the smell of barbecue settled gently over the crowd. At 58 years old, Daniel Carter stood near the edge of the main stage, arms folded, quietly observing the scene. He had spent more than 25 years as a police officer in Portland before retiring. He had seen enough darkness in his career to value simple peace. These days, he preferred the open road, steady friendships, and events that raised money for local charities. To most people passing by, he looked like any other older rider with weathered hands and calm eyes. But those who knew him understood that he still carried the instincts of a man trained to notice what others missed. That was why he saw her before anyone else truly did. She could not have been more than 9 years old. Dark blonde hair clung to her forehead, and her sneakers were dusty, as if she had been walking for some time. She moved through the crowd without looking at the motorcycles or the music stage. She was not here for the rally. She was scanning faces. When she reached Daniel, she stopped just close enough that he could hear her over the music. Her voice was steady, but too steady for a child. "He found me again." There was no dramatic cry for help, no screaming, just a quiet statement delivered with certainty. Daniel felt a chill settle across his shoulders. In his years on patrol, he had learned that the calmest voices sometimes carried the deepest fear. He lowered himself slightly so he would not tower over her. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," she said. "Lily Harper." Her eyes never stopped moving. She glanced over her shoulder every few seconds, measuring distance, calculating exits. Hyper-awareness. Daniel had seen that look in children who had lived too long in survival mode. "Who found you, Lily?" he asked gently.
She swallowed. "He always finds me. I thought if I stayed where there were a lot of people, he wouldn't. But he did." Daniel did not rush her. He did not ask too many questions at once. Instead, he signaled subtly to Ben Thompson and Marcus Hill, 2 longtime members of Thunder Valley Riders. They understood the look on his face and drifted closer, not aggressively, just enough to create space around the child without drawing attention. "Is he your father?" Daniel asked carefully. Lily shook her head. "He says he is my guardian. He has papers. He shows them to people. They always believe him." That word settled heavily in Daniel's mind. Papers. In the United States, legal guardianship is not something that floats loosely between states without documentation that can be verified through county court systems. Case numbers, official seals, judicial signatures. After decades in law enforcement, Daniel knew what legitimate custody paperwork looked like. He also knew how convincing forged documents could appear at first glance. Each year in this country, there are hundreds of thousands of reports involving missing children. Most are resolved quickly, but a small percentage involve complicated interstate situations that require federal coordination. Those cases can stretch across months or even years. Daniel had once worked alongside federal agents on such investigations. He knew how easily a well-dressed adult could manipulate perception. "Has he hurt you?" Daniel asked, keeping his tone steady. Lily hesitated. "He doesn't like it when I talk about things." It was not an answer, but it was enough. Across the street, a dark sedan slowed as it passed the fairgrounds entrance. Lily stiffened instantly. Her breathing changed. "That's his car," she whispered. Daniel did not turn his head too quickly. He simply shifted his gaze in that direction. The vehicle continued down the street, then circled back slowly, watching. Within minutes, a tall man in his early 60s stepped out from the parking area. He wore pressed slacks and a light blue button-down shirt. Clean cut, confident posture, the kind of man who would not draw suspicion in most suburban neighborhoods. He approached with a polite smile. "There you are, Lily. I've been worried sick. I'm Charles Whitman. I believe you've met my daughter." Daniel rose to his full height, but kept one hand resting lightly on Lily's shoulder. "She says her name is Lily Harper." Charles chuckled softly. "Yes, well, she struggles with confusion sometimes. It's part of her trauma history. I'm her court-appointed guardian." He reached into a leather folder and produced documents. Nevada court seals, official-looking signatures, a case number typed neatly at the top. Daniel accepted the papers without comment. He scanned the format. Something felt off. The county name seemed mismatched to the listed jurisdiction. The case number structure did not align with the standardized format he remembered from similar filings. It was subtle, the kind of inconsistency most people would never notice. "We move frequently because of my work. Interstate travel can complicate things. I understand how this might look." Marcus stepped slightly closer, not threatening, simply present. Ben positioned himself near the curb, quietly noting the sedan's license plate. Daniel handed the documents back. "We're going to verify these through the proper channels." Charles's smile thinned just a fraction. "I'm sure you understand that interfering with legal custody arrangements can carry serious consequences." Daniel met his eyes evenly. "And failing to verify them can carry even greater ones." Around them, the music from the stage continued. Families laughed. Engines revved in the distance. To anyone walking by, it looked like a calm conversation between adults, but within that small circle, the air had shifted. Lily's fingers tightened around the edge of Daniel's vest. He could feel her trembling. And in that moment, the rally was no longer just a gathering of motorcycles and memories. It had become something else entirely. Daniel did not raise his voice, and he did not escalate the situation. Instead, he gave Ben a quiet nod. Within minutes, the local sheriff's office was contacted, not as an accusation, but as a request for verification. If the documents were legitimate, confirmation would be straightforward. If they were not, the truth would surface quickly. Charles Whitman remained composed, though his earlier warmth had cooled into something more guarded. While they waited, Daniel guided Lily toward the club's mobile first aid trailer, where Dr. Alan Brooks volunteered during every rally. Alan was a retired family physician who believed strongly in community service. He understood immediately that this was not an ordinary situation. He knelt to Lily's level, speaking softly, asking simple questions that did not feel like an interrogation. Lily answered cautiously at first. She said she had been traveling for a long time. She said they moved often. She could not remember the name of the last school she attended. When Dr. Brooks offered her a bottle of water and a sandwich, she accepted quickly, but then hesitated before taking the first bite. She glanced toward the door as if asking silent permission from someone who was not there. Daniel noticed the way she folded half of the sandwich into a napkin and slipped it into her pocket. That small gesture said more than any dramatic confession could have. Children who experience prolonged uncertainty around meals often develop habits of saving food. It is a survival response. It is not disobedience. It is not greed. It is the body remembering what the mind tries to forget. Dr. Brooks later told Daniel that Lily showed signs consistent with extended stress. Her weight was lower than expected for her height. There were dark circles under her eyes that suggested interrupted sleep. She startled easily at sudden noises. None of these signs proved wrongdoing on their own, but together they formed a pattern.
Outside, Marcus sat with his laptop, using publicly accessible databases to cross-reference the information from the paperwork. The case number did not appear in the Nevada County system. The judicial signature, when compared to archived examples, did not match. Even the formatting of the seal was slightly misaligned. At the same time, Then had shared the sedan's license plate with local authorities. Within an hour, the response came back that the vehicle was registered under a different name entirely, not Charles Whitman, a name tied to multiple short-term rental agreements across several states. Daniel's instincts sharpened. Interstate movement, changing identities. In law enforcement, those patterns often required federal attention. Sheriff David Collins arrived shortly after, stepping out of his cruiser with measured authority. He was a practical man in his early 50s who valued facts over impressions. Daniel greeted him respectfully and explained the inconsistencies without embellishment. Sheriff Collins reviewed the documents himself and agreed that verification was necessary before any child left the grounds. Charles objected, though he maintained his polished tone. He insisted that Lily struggled with behavioral confusion and had a tendency to run when overwhelmed. He framed the situation as a misunderstanding fueled by overprotective strangers. But then something shifted.
Marcus looked up from his screen, his face tightening. He had expanded the search beyond Nevada. In Washington state, there was an open missing child report filed nearly 20 months earlier for a 9-year-old named Lily Harper. The report referenced an ongoing federal investigation connected to her family's case. Details were limited to protect the integrity of the investigation, but the timeline aligned with the period Lily described as traveling. Daniel felt a quiet weight settle in his chest. He knelt beside Lily again. "Lily," he asked gently, "do you remember where you lived before you started moving around?" She closed her eyes for a moment. "There was a blue house. My aunt used to make pancakes on Saturdays, and we had a dog named Ranger." Marcus typed quickly. The missing child report included mention of extended family in Washington and a dog registered under that exact name. Sheriff Collins made a call to the state authorities listed in the report. Within a short time, the matter escalated beyond county jurisdiction. An alert was transmitted to federal agents assigned to the case. Less than an hour later, 2 unmarked vehicles arrived at the fairgrounds. A woman in a navy blazer stepped out, her badge visible at her belt. "Agent Emily Rodriguez," she introduced herself calmly. She reviewed the documents, listened to Daniel's account, and spoke briefly with Lily in private. When she returned, her expression carried confirmation without theatrics. "Charles Whitman is an alias," she said quietly to Sheriff Collins and Daniel. "He is a person of interest in a multi-state investigation involving child disappearances connected through false guardianship claims. We have been tracking movement patterns that match this vehicle." There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just the steady click of handcuffs when federal agents approached Charles near the edge of the lot. He attempted to protest, but the paperwork in his folder had already been identified as fraudulent. As he was escorted away, Lily did not look at him. She kept her eyes fixed on Daniel. For the first time since she had spoken those 4 quiet words, her shoulders lowered slightly. Not completely. Healing does not happen in a single afternoon, but enough to show that something had changed. The crowd beyond their small circle continued with the rally, unaware that within their gathering a different kind of protection had just taken place. That evening, after the federal vehicles had disappeared down the highway and the rally lights began to glow against the Oregon sky, the atmosphere at Thunder Valley Riders felt different. The music still played, engines still rumbled, but for Daniel Carter, the world had narrowed to one small folding chair inside the first aid trailer, where Lily sat wrapped in a borrowed sweatshirt. Agent Emily Rodriguez remained on site for several hours.
She explained the situation carefully, choosing words that were truthful without overwhelming a child who had already carried too much. The investigation into Charles Whitman had been active for months. Authorities suspected a pattern involving falsified guardianship documents and repeated interstate movement. Several cases were under federal review. Lily's identification would help close critical gaps. Daniel listened quietly. He had learned long ago that real justice often moves slowly, built on documentation and patience rather than dramatic moments. Still, hearing that this child's situation had been part of a larger investigation deepened his understanding of how fragile safety can be. Lily sat with her hands folded, absorbing only parts of the adult conversation. When Agent Rodriguez gently asked if she would be willing to speak with a child advocacy specialist the following day, Lily nodded. She did not ask about Charles. She did not look toward the parking lot. Instead, she asked a different question. "Am I going back to Washington?" Agent Rodriguez knelt so their eyes were level. "We're going to make sure you go somewhere safe. We've located your aunt and uncle. They've been searching for you." At the mention of family, something flickered across Lily's face. Recognition mixed with uncertainty. Trauma can blur memory, but it does not erase it completely. Daniel could see her trying to piece together fragments of an earlier life. Over the next few days, arrangements were made carefully and deliberately. Lily was placed temporarily with a licensed child advocacy center in Oregon, where trained counselors specialized in supporting children who had experienced prolonged instability. According to the American Psychological Association, children who receive early, consistent therapeutic support have significantly stronger long-term outcomes. Stability, routine, and trustworthy adults become the foundation for rebuilding confidence. Daniel visited with permission. He did not overwhelm her with promises. He simply showed up. He brought coloring books. He sat quietly while she talked about ordinary things like school subjects she used to enjoy and the way Ranger the dog would chase squirrels in the yard. Within a week, a supervised video call was arranged with Sarah Harper and her husband, Thomas Harper, Lily's aunt and uncle in Washington State. When their faces appeared on the screen, there were tears on both sides. Sarah's voice trembled as she said Lily's name. Thomas spoke gently about the blue house and the old oak tree in the backyard. Lily listened carefully. At first, she seemed unsure, but when Sarah mentioned Saturday pancakes shaped like stars, Lily's eyes widened. A memory surfaced. "You let me pour the syrup myself," she said quietly. Sarah nodded through tears. "Every time." That moment did not erase the past months, but it created a bridge. Memory, even partial memory, can anchor identity. Agent Rodriguez later explained that reuniting children with familiar figures must be done gradually, allowing emotional adjustment to unfold at a manageable pace. Sudden transitions can overwhelm a nervous system that has lived in constant alert. The Harpers traveled to Oregon the following weekend. Their meeting with Lily took place in a calm, supervised setting with counselors nearby. There were no dramatic embraces at first. Instead, there were small gestures. Sarah brushing Lily's hair gently behind her ear. Thomas offering reassurance without pressure. Lily asking questions about school, about Ranger, about whether the oak tree was still standing. Agent Rodriguez observed from a respectful distance. He understood that his role was shifting. He had stepped forward when protection was needed. Now the responsibility belonged to family and professionals trained to guide the healing process. In quiet conversations with Agent Rodriguez and the Harpers, Daniel suggested maintaining consistent contact during the transition. Research supports the idea that children recovering from trauma benefit when supportive relationships are preserved rather than abruptly severed. Sarah agreed without hesitation. She expressed gratitude not only for Lily's safety, but for the presence of people who had acted decisively when it mattered. A gradual plan was established. Lily would spend several weeks in Washington with her aunt and uncle, supported by licensed therapists. Regular phone calls with Daniel and occasional visits to Oregon would be arranged, ensuring that the network of care expanded rather than contracted.
When the day came for Lily to travel north, she stood beside Daniel in the parking lot outside the Advocacy Center. The afternoon sun felt softer than it had the day she first arrived at the rally. "Will I see you again?" she asked. Daniel smiled gently. "Of course you will. You've got a whole team now." She nodded, as if absorbing the meaning of that word. Team. Not one protector, not one fragile plan, but a circle of adults working together. As the Harper's vehicle pulled away, Daniel felt the familiar ache that comes when someone you care about leaves your immediate sight. Yet beneath that ache was something steadier, the knowledge that safety had replaced fear, that verification, patience, and collaboration had done what impulse alone never could. In the weeks that followed, updates came regularly. Lily was attending counseling sessions twice a week. She had started school again. She slept through most nights without waking. Progress was measured not in grand announcements, but in simple milestones: eating full meals without hiding food, laughing during a board game, asking about future plans. For Daniel Carter, the lesson was clear. Protection is not only about stepping in during crisis, it is about standing beside a child long enough for stability to take root. And sometimes the strongest families are built not just by blood, but by the steady choice to care. 6 months later, the fairgrounds in Riverside looked much the same as they had that summer afternoon, but for Daniel Carter, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The Thunder Valley Riders gathering had returned, engines lining the gravel paths, families unfolding lawn chairs, veterans swapping stories beneath wide-brimmed hats. The sound of motorcycles rolling in carried its familiar rhythm, steady and reassuring, like a heartbeat you could feel through the ground. But this time, when Daniel stood near the registration table, he was not scanning the crowd for danger. He was waiting for a small voice he had come to recognize, even over the rumble of chrome and steel. "Daniel!" He turned just in time to see Lily Harper running toward him, her stride confident, her shoulders relaxed in a way they had not been 6 months earlier. She had grown taller. Her cheeks were fuller, her movements lighter. There was no constant glance over her shoulder now, no tight grip on the edge of someone's sleeve. She reached him and wrapped her arms around his waist without hesitation. Daniel rested a hand gently on her back, steady and warm. "How's Washington treating you?" he asked. "Good," she said with a grin. "I made the honor roll, and Aunt Sarah says I can start soccer this fall." Her voice carried something new, not just safety, but possibility. Behind her, Sarah and Thomas Harper approached, their expressions calm and grateful. The past months had not erased the challenges. There had been therapy appointments, difficult conversations, nights when old fears resurfaced. But according to the counselors working with Lily, consistency had made the difference. Stable routines, clear boundaries, adults who followed through on promises. The American Psychological Association often emphasizes that recovery for children who have experienced prolonged stress depends heavily on reliable support systems, not dramatic rescues, not one heroic act, but steady presence over time. Sarah extended her hand to Daniel, then pulled him into a brief embrace instead. "She talks about you all the time," she said softly, "about the rally, about the day you believed her." Daniel shook his head slightly. "She did the brave part. She spoke up." Thomas nodded,
and you listened. That simple exchange carried more weight than applause ever could. Later that afternoon, Lily helped hand out registration packets at the Thunder Valley Riders booth. She took her role seriously, greeting riders with a shy but growing confidence. Several members of the club stopped to chat with her, not as a symbol, not as a story, but as a child they genuinely cared about. Sheriff David Collins stopped by as well. He exchanged a firm handshake with Daniel and offered Lily a respectful nod. In the months since the incident, the sheriff's office had worked closely with federal partners to strengthen verification procedures related to interstate guardianship claims. The case had become a quiet reminder that vigilance must be paired with due process. Agent Emily Rodriguez had called earlier that week with an update. The investigation connected to Charles Whitman had concluded. Multiple jurisdictions had coordinated successfully, and several families had received long-awaited answers. The legal proceedings were thorough and measured, as federal cases often are. Justice in this country can take time, but when institutions and communities cooperate, the system works as it was designed to. As the sun began to set, Daniel and Lily sat on a bench overlooking the rows of motorcycles. The evening light painted everything in soft gold. "Do you ever think about that day?" Lily asked. "Sometimes," Daniel replied honestly. "I was really scared," she said. "I know." She looked out at the riders, at families gathered around picnic tables, at children chasing one another between lawn chairs. "I'm not scared like that anymore." Daniel let that sentence settle. Not scared like that anymore. Healing does not mean forgetting. It means learning that fear no longer controls every breath. Sarah and Thomas joined them, and together they watched the last of the day's arrivals roll in. The Harpers had recently made a decision to relocate closer to Oregon, reducing the distance between Lily's biological family and the community that had stepped forward when she needed it most. It was not an impulsive choice. It was the result of months of conversation, counseling, and careful planning. Family, Daniel had come to understand, is not limited by geography or defined only by blood. It is shaped by commitment, by who shows up when circumstances are uncertain. As the rally lights flickered on and the first notes of evening music drifted across the grounds, Lily leaned her head lightly against Daniel's shoulder. Not because she was afraid, simply because she was comfortable. At 58, Daniel had believed he had already lived the most meaningful chapters of his life. He had served his city. He had built lifelong friendships on the road. He had learned to accept both loss and change. Yet standing there beneath the Oregon sky, he realized something important. Sometimes the most significant moments do not arrive with sirens or headlines. They arrive quietly, in the form of a child who gathers the courage to speak 4 simple words, in the form of adults who choose to pause, verify, and protect instead of looking the other way. In a nation as large and complex as the United States, laws matter. Systems matter, documentation matters, but so does community, so does the willingness of ordinary citizens to pay attention. As the engines hummed into the night and laughter echoed across the fairgrounds, Daniel felt a steady peace settle within him. Lily was not defined by what had happened to her. She was defined by the strength she carried forward and the network that now stood behind her. And sometimes, protection does not always arrive with flashing lights. Sometimes it arrives on 2 wheels, guided by people who choose to care.